that record?
All right, it is rolling.
We're rolling now?
We are. So day one.
Day one.
Explain your experience exiting the birth canal.
Well, the earliest experiences that I remember is 3 years old when my dad, or my mother, I don't know who, they got divorced and I was 3 years old. And I remember that because looking out the back of my bedroom window, there was a skunk and her babies coming through the garden. And it made an impact. And then my dad was gone. And I never understood why. Didn't know how to ask my mother why at age 3 or 4. Just remember that we moved shortly thereafter from Altadena, California to, I think it was Manhattan Beach or Huntington Beach, California, and we walked the ocean every day and picked up cans and fresh fruit. And my mother would hold them in her skirt, and I would ask her where these came from. And she said, "Son, these are from the ships that sunk at sea during the war." And it was always a surprise every day. We'd go home and open up a can, and one time it would be canned meat, another time it would be canned fruit, another time it would be canned vegetables. We never knew what the surprise was going to be because the labels had all washed off at sea. So we looked forward to doing that. That ended, somewhere that year or so. I'd say about 4, I was maybe 4 years old then. Walking on the beach and I stepped on a beer bottle. And I still have a half moon shape on the bottom of my foot from that cut. And my mother came over screaming, blood all over the sand. And I didn't think it was any big deal, but she did. Then shortly thereafter, I'd say somewhere around age 5, we moved from the beach house. And before we moved from the beach house, we were staying with a friend of my mom's. I always assumed it maybe was an aunt or something, but I don't know for sure. But I was playing with my little buddy, and he jumped off the dresser in his bedroom to the bed. That's what we were doing, and with the parents out being preoccupied in the other rooms. And when he did, he missed and broke his collarbone. So we all ran to the hospital. They came back, and his arm and collar and whole shoulder was in a cast, and his dad came home that evening. And he said, Dad, let me show you what I did today. And before anybody could stop him, he'd run in, got on top of the dresser, and jumped off again and missed the bed and broke his other collarbone. So he spent the entire summer
Oh my gosh.
without even being able to move. And I don't remember ever seeing him after that. We moved from there to Ojai, California, and I had a new stepfather. And it was Bob Merriam of Merriam-Webster Dictionary Company. Very strict, very Victorian. Children were to be seen and not heard unless spoken to. That's the only time we were allowed to speak when he was home. And every meal when he was home, the silverware was all lined up with instructions from my mother on what fork and knife and spoon we used for the entire meal, with little crystal water dishes that we rinsed our fingers off, and little crystal deals with salt in them, and a little bitty ladle to do the salt. And we were to eat everything on our plate, and if we didn't, we were sent immediately to bed without the rest of our supper, or if we interrupted for any reason. And then he'd leave. I was happy. I'd go out in the backyard because the war was prominent in America at that time, and I started building trenches in the backyard like you would see in the newsreels, covering those trenches with cardboard, plywood, whatever we could get.
What year were you born?
1942.
So
So the
the war's still going on at this point?
well, the war, the newsreels and the war stories and the
Gotcha.
movies and things like that
Gotcha.
were influenced and
Gotcha.
influenced us. So now we're playing war games like the big people in our backyard. By this time I've got to be 5, 6 years old, and the property in Ojai. Oh, it was huge. It had every vegetable known to mankind. My mother loved gardening and taught me transplanting and grafting fruits and things like that on trees. And the earliest ages that I remember her ever lying to me was that she would have me take Easter egg dye that she would save, and I often wondered why, but it made, in the spring when the irises were blooming, and she had a garden party, she'd have me go pour a certain dye on a certain iris plant, and she'd have different colors, irises, in this great big floating bowl as the decor. And I can remember the women saying, "Where did you ever find this color?" She said, "Well, I've been experimenting with pollination."
Wow. Okay.
Which I knew was untrue, but I wasn't about to blow my mother's cover. I just thought she was being funny or whatever. So that made it acceptable. So she was telling a story. So that gave me the liberty at that moment on to be able to tell any story I wanted. And I got very good at making them very believable as the years went on. Then there was arguments I would hear between the walls of the two of them fighting, and which made the whole house uneasy. My sister had been sent off to Santa Barbara to Montesino, which is a girls' school. Sat on the beach in Santa Barbara, still there to this day. And she was 8 years older, so I saw her on weekends, and she became my caretaker. She was sort of the motherly influence and believed that she could tell me to go do anything.
Is she still alive?
And, well, I don't know. She interfered in Bobby and my marriage in 94, and as she was trying to come in the house, just open the door and walk in, I put my foot down and held the door closed and told her that if she didn't leave, I'd call 911. I was tired of her interference in my life. And that was the last time I spoke to her. It was 1994. She had lost her first two husbands to cancer within 90 days to 120 days of the time the doctor diagnosed it. And after that, she became a lesbian, which went against my belief systems. I didn't think that was right. The belief systems comes from going to Sunday school from birth to the different marriages. The first one was Protestant Sunday school.
So she was never married.
And no, my sister was married. The first husband, they got married. He owned a paint store in Sunnyvale, California. And she was home, housewife, raising her pet birds. She liked parakeets and little sparrows and things like that. And she opened up the mail, and here was a letter addressed to him. So she opened it. It was from Japan, and it was his Japanese wife flying in from Japan with his son.
Okay. Surprise.
Surprise, surprise, surprise. So she immediately left him, and that threw her into a funny farm. She lost her mind. The best I could describe it, she just wasn't right. And my mother sent her away to a private hospital. And I don't know what for, really, other than when she seemed okay.
What's her first name?
Alma.
Alma. So you were saying before I interrupted you, Alma was like 8 years older than you, so she
Yeah,
was kind of like a mothering figure.
Mothering thing. So I was concerned that here's this playmate, sister, that I had done things to when we lived on in Manhattan Beach, actually. My my sister was repainting her bedroom pink, and she had done something to me that day, and it irritated me. And she had gone to the county fair and come back with a great big white teddy bear, and I took the her pink paint when she left the room and painted her bear pink. And her cat came in, and I took the cat and I dunked it in a 5-gallon bucket of paint, and it ran off. And
Oh my goodness.
the years and years and years went by when I had foster kids. I said, if you're ever in LA and see a pink cat stuck on top of a fence in that position, I said, it was supposed to be my sister's cat from 1947. And I said, and she would chase me all through the house, trying to catch me to beat me to death.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, Bubba, you can be up here but not with that on, so you can either play that downstairs or we can turn that off. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Play game.
Okay, so you can go
And
downstairs. Okay.
I can remember her chasing me, and that was the first time I remember picking a rose as I ran through the garden. I ran into the kitchen to my mother, and I said, "Here's a rose, Mom." And Alma comes running in behind me, ready to kill me. And I said, she's trying to beat me. My mother said, "Daughter, leave him alone." Which really pissed off my sister. And but after that, that was going backwards a little bit, and that's funny how that popped into my brain. But and we went to Ojai, California. And at that time, she got me into arts and crafts, sent me to special schools. To learn, I had the ability to sketch with charcoals, like this scene here on the table of the banana and the candles and stuff like that. And I would get A's and B's for my abilities. And I can remember gluing plastic together after I cut out hearts. And when the glue came together, that glue we dye red so that it would glow, make that heart, that little pennant that I gave to my mother, his heart. And then she put me in, which I didn't like. She made me play Ferdinand the Bull in some kind of a play at school, I imagine, and then Humpty Dumpty. And I hated that. I hated, for whatever reason, I didn't like that. I didn't like being, in my mind, the fool. Although I was being a fool on everywhere else in my life, but yeah, for some reason that always bothered me. It gave me a sense of stage fright, and I didn't know why I was afraid of public speaking, but I always, in my mind, go back to that moment in time that I was forced to do that. And then one day my mom came into the bedroom, and I was playing with my Lionel trains, and I built bridges. The reason she came in is I built a bridge with the Lionel train. This was a full-size Lionel train, and put little pellets in the smokestack, and it would puff smoke. And I built a ramp all the way up to the window so I could launch the train right out the window. It was a crashing bridge into the backyard. And of course, she was in the backyard in the garden when that happened, telling me that I could not launch my train through the window. And at the same time, she said, your aunt's going to come take care of you. Your sister will be home on the weekends. I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks. I said, okay, Mom. And I didn't get in trouble for launching the train other than she telling me not to do it. At the same time, I was experimental in trying to figure out why the train worked, and I would take her bobby pins and spread them apart and stick them in light sockets and blow the fuses in the house and burn my fingers. So that's not very smart. And I had the ability to take things apart. My mother had a broken old-fashioned, I call it old-fashioned, but a alarm clock that had the two little bells on the top, and you set it, and the clapper go back and forth, and it stopped working, and she was going to throw it away, and I said, I'll fix it. And I got little screwdrivers, and I took it all apart and put it all back together, and she still had it keeping the exact time when I went in the military. stove was working. So I had that fix-it ability. If I took something apart, I could put it back together. If I watched you take something apart, I could put it back together. I just had that kind of memory. But Mom left. In those 2 weeks that she left, I got bumps on both sides. I got tonsillitis. I turned completely yellow like that banana there with jaundice, and nobody could do anything because they needed a parental consent. So I lived through those particular little incidences, and still to this day have my tonsils. Didn't die from being what they tell me later is yellow jaundice, and didn't get the bumps, and didn't get any of those things until 1960. And the reason 1960 is important, I went in the military in boot camp. Everybody's lined up, and we got 27 shots in one day as you're walking down. And the military used rusty, bent needles on purpose. But I caught every disease that they gave me and spent the next 2 weeks in the infirmary because my body had never had medicine. Which leads me to why my mother disappeared. And back to that incident, and my sister wakes me up. About a week or so had gone by, 2 weeks had gone by. I was now well again, and she said, "We're gonna go see Mom. Get up and get dressed." And it was dark outside, and we got up and got dressed, and we drove. It seemed for hours, but we drove from Ojai to the L.A. airport and caught a puddle jumper, a DC-3, two-prop airplane, and flew from, they call them puddle hoppers because they only had enough fuel to go 400 or 500 miles, so they would jump from LA to Phoenix, Phoenix to Tucson, across the United States, and we landed in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And here is my mother, and greeting me and my sister at the tarmac. And I was 7-ish, about 7. And I have to go back because the next incident that happened that day after driving through the swamp, I was in heaven because my childhood idol was Tarzan, Johnny Weissmuller, and he was at our country club, and he's the one that taught me how to swim when I was 4. My mom has a picture somewhere of me standing between Tarzan's legs. So when I got to Louisiana and saw the Spanish moss and the flowers and all that, it reminded me of the movies, and I was looking for Tarzan and Cheetah all through that entire hour and a half that it took to get to the plantation. And when I got to the plantation, it was a 27-room mansion, and it wasn't burned when Sherman marched. They used it as a field hospital, and it was just for my mom and her new husband and my sister and I. And the kitchen ceilings must have been 12 foot tall, with pots and pans hanging from the ceiling in the monster kitchen. And you went into the dining room that was, I'd say 20 feet wide, 30, 40 feet long, and she walked up to the wall. Rather than the doors swinging open, she slid them back on track into the walls, and they creaked like crazy. And this man in the far corner happened to be the only light coming into the plantation that was on in that big building. And he turned. He was sitting in a high-back black leather chair with a wrought iron lamp, tassels and silk, and hanging down on it. And he had been reading a book. And as he spun, I went into shock. And the reason I'd gone into shock is before I'd left Ojai, a year or so earlier, 6 months earlier, us kids would cut through this farmer's orchard, and we'd steal great big navel oranges. And one day he started chasing us on the tractor, and I wouldn't let loose of the orange, and the orange limb broke, and we got away. But we know that he also owned the antique store in town. So the next time my mother took us to town, I broke free of her just with the excuse I wanted to go see my buddies across the street to avoid going into the antique store so that he wouldn't recognize me and tell my mother that I was stealing his oranges. So when I saw him at the plantation, I figured that they knew. And my mother was delivering me to the devil in person to have me beat to death. And which didn't happen. But he never understood. You know, I never told him that story, or my mother that story. They passed on long before I ever told them the story. And I didn't tell him, my older sister, I didn't tell her that story until they had passed. And see, now I understand why you didn't like Gene and wouldn't let him adopt you. Because his disciplinary manner was, he was a full bird colonel underneath Eisenhower World War II. And he was very military. And if he couldn't get me to shape up by doing push-ups, he'd grab a stick and bust it across my back or something like that. And by age 12, I finally said, there's some more 2x4s. You want me to go get you another one? And that was when he lost control. He couldn't control me through fear anymore. Because I was tough enough at that point. The abuse, I call it abuse. Yeah, I could get a beating for leaving the garden gate open. Or talking back to my mother. And changed a little bit. She got pregnant and had my brother. He's 8 years younger than I am. Born by a colored midwife on the plantation. She cooked breakfast the next morning after giving birth and did the laundry, and life was normal. And then went to the hospital, and then she gave birth to Bruce 18 months, 2 years later on the plantation. And but he favored his children, which nobody would ever. I would try to get attention. Of course, my attention getting at that time was starting a fire in the backyard or shooting rockets off of with slingshots or things that weren't appropriate ways to get.
Match your lights. Just move your hand to the loose.
That's right. Match the lights, move your hands to the loose. That's right. That's how you play. You gonna play your arcade now or something?
So
how many children?
they
Yeah.
had two, my two brothers.
One was Bruce and the other one was.
Ross, actually, they call him. We called him Rusty.
Okay.
And he later, Bruce became the youngest pilot. His pilot's license at age 13. My stepfather had a biplane. Not a biplane, a split tail. I'm trying to think what kind of plane it is, but anyhow. And Ross played, was very musical, played the drums, and him and his band that they created played at the state fair, won at the state fair, won a recording contract. Never won anywhere, but they won a recording contract. And now we left the plantation and back to California, but going back to the plantation, I would, one of my jobs was to collect the eggs in the morning, and you had to pick up the chickens and reach in, and because you had egg snakes, the snakes that would eat, swallow eggs whole in Louisiana, just a garden, not poisonous, but they're garden variety, like a gopher snake out here, possibly. And you might both even have them up here in the part neck of the woods. And when I caught them, I'd cut their heads off and I would tan their little hides, and I'd make belt buckles or headbands or things like that out of them and hang them in my room and spread them out. So I was used to doing that. And my sister came home. By that time, my sister was in college, and they'd sent her to LSU in Louisiana, in New Orleans actually. And she'd come home that weekend, and I thought of a good trick to play on my sister with this snake. I didn't cut his head off. I hit him with the backside of the shovel, I guess knocked him out. I thought I killed him. and I ran into the kitchen, this one with the 12-foot ceilings, and pots and pans, and my mother was putting down tomatoes in a pressure cooker, was on the stove, and the girls were in there talking, and I ran in, squeezing the back of the snake's head, and it was a cottonmouth, and cottonmouths have big teeth on them, sort of like a rattlesnake, a vision of a rattlesnake does. And I was holding the other end, and I was scared my sister was the idea, and of course my sister and mother left the room immediately and left me in there with the snake. And the snake came back to life. I had just knocked him out. So now I'm 8 years old with a live cottonmouth, and they're as poisonous as a rattlesnake. And I get outside, and I'm out in the barnyard, and I'm getting ready to throw him away when Johnny, the black kid, came roaring in his pickup, and he saw me, and he slid to a stop, and they called me Master, Little Master, because it was very Southern back in the 40s. And he said, "Don't let loose that snake. Johnny help you take care of it." And he said, "Now you give me the tail, and I'll show you how you kill snakes properly." And he grabbed that snake's tail, and he said, "Now, when I tell you, let go of the head." And I let go of the head, and he swung that snake around his head a dozen or so times, and then snapped it like a whip and popped that head right off that snake and hit a pecan tree. And he said, "Now, next time," he says, "you just grab him by the tail, swing him around, pop him off." He says, "You can't curl up if you're swinging him." And I said, and he was also the one that taught me to hunt squirrels. We had flying squirrels there. And his mammy could cook a squirrel up, I gotta tell you, to die for good. And fish, boys. And they'd been born, their family had been born into slavery on that plantation. And the walls were 1.5 to 2 inches thick of newspaper. Because every time they ran newspapers, she'd make a floury paste it on the wall, and it was the insulation to keep the weather out. Those old shanty shacks. And but as time went on, and same year, I guess I'm about approaching 12 in April, so it must have been the spring of 44. 45, 54. I was in 4-H, and I had pigs. My sister had sheep. I had chickens being judged, and my mother had always believed that us kids should be able to learn to do everything in the household to be good parents. It was one of her things, and she said, "You like cherry pies? Why don't you enter to motivate me? Enter a cherry pie pie competition at the county fair." And I said, "Okay." So my family ate cherry pie every day for weeks until they didn't like cherry pies anymore. But the secret ingredient in your pie is you'd make the crust from scratch, and the secret making crust is you use 2 bowls, the bottom bowl being full of ice, the second bowl sits in the ice, and when you knead the dough in there, you're keeping it cool. So you're just kneading enough to get together so it would stick together, and then you'd lay it out on a cold piece of marble, and you'd roll it out, and you'd drop it in the dish. In the process of making it, in the old South, the women used lard or Crisco to hold the flour all together, bend the flour together. My mother used butter opposed to lard, and she had me go out and get a lemon, and you grate a tablespoon of lemon rind off and mix that in with your dough, which kills all the other flavors and gives it a sort of fresh, springy characteristic to it. So when I entered at the county fair, the women kept coming back, the judges kept coming back to my pie. And I ended up winning a blue ribbon in the pie against all these 40-year-old Southern women that had always won the blue ribbons. And they all assumed that my mother had cooked the pie, that I had not really done it. And of course my parents swore that I had done it. So to prove a point, she we went to the state fair in Shreveport, Louisiana, that same year, and I entered the cherry pie again and got second place at the state fair of Louisiana, 1954, I guess it was. And at that state fair is when I understood the power of God, or I thought I understood the power of God, because when Mom married Gene, when I was young, we became Christian Scientists. So we went from 100% medicine in our lives to 100% prayer. And my sister got caught between in the loading chutes, offloading her sheep, as the truck backed up too much, and she didn't get out of the way, and it cracked her ribs. And of course, at the state fair, the state got involved, took x-rays, registered the doctors, and my parents used their constitutional right that says we don't allow any medicine or whatever. We'll just pray over the child. And of course, the state, to get rid of their responsibility, after 6 weeks, wanted new x-rays taken to make sure that she was healing properly, and there was no evidence of any breakage or cracks at all in her rib cage. And because my stepfather's mother was a Christian Science practitioner, and she was the one that at the church that prayed for everybody. She was supposedly the one that was in direct contact with God. We were in direct contact with her. So. And but that was the first thing that I said was amazing. And I can remember things like her telling me that with the faith of a grain of mustard seed, you can move mountains, which is a passage, I believe, out of the New Testament. And she says, as long as you have that. And to get me to be more religious, and also, I think, for my stepfather to have more time with his two sons, he sent me off to a Christian Science boarding school in St. Louis. And so I went across the country 12 times by train. You know, come back every year for Christmas break. You'd come back at Christmas to home, and then you'd get the train to go back, and school would start up on the 4th of January, or right after the first of the year. And you lived in a dorm with one of the teachers, because it was a boarding school. They also had walk-in students, but it was a big campus. And then fourth year, I got tired of being isolated from the family. I felt they were trying to get rid of me. And didn't seem like what they were doing didn't match what I was learning in, for lack of a better word, Sunday school. And so I, in the middle of a snowstorm in St. Louis in February, I put on 2 sport coats and 2 shirts and 2 pair of pants and 2 socks and my shoes, and walked from the campus to the train station, stuck on board the trains. By this time I knew all the trains really, really good. Maybe had a couple of dollars in my pocket, and managed to make that train all the way to Kansas City to where we had to get tickets to.
That's 2 years down here, top of fortune.
No, we're not gonna have a little fortune.
And then we, so I made it to the cross-country train, Southern Pacific, I think it was. And, I'd say the second day out, a black conductor. So sort of see his image, 6 foot tall, or at least in my mind he was 6 foot tall. He looked down at me and says, "Paul, is that you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is there death in the family?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "School can't be out. This is February. You're not due to be riding this train till April." He said, "You don't have a ticket, do you?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't have a ticket." "Well, don't worry about it. You need anything, I'll tell him up at the club car that you can just sign your name. I'll take care of it. He said, you have a good trip. I'll keep an eye on it, which he did. And I
I'm
had
a
a good
little
trip.
unsure about the geography. So you were in Louisiana and
No, Louisiana. Wait, in Louisiana, we left there right after the cherry pie and the state fair, and we were there 4 years. So that would be somewhere in '54 we left, or thereabouts. I'm trying to put the dates right, but and we packaged up, killed. I'm glad you brought that up because getting ready to go back to California, they sold the plantation. I had 174 white rock chickens that I raised for extra money and for the fair that we slaughtered in one weekend, and we did chickens running all over the yard as my sister's plucking them, my mother's gutting them, cutting them up, and putting them down in freezers. And we took the old farm truck, cattle truck, and we loaded with 55-gallon drums. And the plantation was lined with a circular driveway. Was a pecan tree, magnolia tree, pecan tree, magnolia tree in this 1 mile circle. And we picked up all the pecans and shelled them, and we're very careful to keep the holes in one 55-gallon drum and the crumbs in another 55-gallon drum. So we took all these produce, all the canning and all the stuff my mother preserves, things like that they put down. Blackstrap molasses because we raised sugar cane, and wool from the sheep, and all this went back as this caravan went across the country. And every night we'd pull into a motel and run an extension cord in to keep the freezers all up and running overnight. And we arrived in Fairfax, California, which is Marin County, across the San Francisco Golden Gate. The reason we headed there is that Jean's mother lived in Oakland at that time, and I remember that in there they put me into Boy Scout or Cub Scouts, and I got kicked out of Cub Scouts because we raided the Girl Scouts or tents and hung their panties on flagpoles. They didn't think that was funny. Boy Scouts didn't have any sense of humor, and so then.
so your first 8 or so years was in California, right? And then you were in
No,
Louisiana?
first 6 or so years. First
Gotcha.
five, maybe 5 years, 5, 6 years.
Okay, and then Louisiana. Was after that.
Then Louisiana on the plantation, and
And then back to California.
then about I want to say 55. I don't remember now what year. I'm trying to go by ages of these timing. These memories are different. It's one thing to say something out of you when you're not trying to tie the timeline together.
Right.
But they couldn't handle. I mean, Alma's off getting married by this time, or in college. She graduated from college, I think, LSU. So she's off in her own world, dating, didn't live at home anymore. I'm there with my 2 younger brothers and became their babysitters when Mom and Dad wanted to go to the picture show or dinner or whatever. I'm 8 years older and 10 years older than they are. And so now I became the father figure, so to speak, I guess, and the instigator to the pack. Keep them excited. Let's go chop down a cherry tree, you know, that kind of mentality.
I assume those 2 are still alive, probably?
Yeah, and when we'll get to that part of the story down the road, but basically they sent me off to Christian boarding school in St. Louis, and so I didn't see them except for holidays and summer when I came back.
And what grades would that have been the equivalent of?
Oh, 7th, 8th, 9th, somewhere in there.
Okay.
In grade school, and because I think I had to be 12 years old to ride the train, so I must have been 12, thereabouts. And so when I came back from school, they'd left Fairfax and they'd gotten a job with Eichler, selling Eichler homes, which were T911 siding, no insulation, Philippine mahogany paneling on the inside, flat tar roof, open beam ceilings, and the entire outside walls are all covered in glasses so that you could enjoy the ambience of California life, and a swimming pool in the backyard. And so now I'm back in the family, and we were the first house in the subdivision to have television. And I remember that because all my little buddies would come over. And my mother wanted to tell me to do something, and I had no idea what it was. And I looked at her and I said, "You're nothing but a hypocrite." And she slapped me clean across the kitchen floor. And I got myself up. She, "Why'd you call me a hypocrite?" And I said, "Well, you've had 3 husbands and 4 or 5 boyfriends that I know of. You lie to your girlfriends, you cheat on your taxes, and you lie to your customers because you're sales." And I said, the conversations around dinner are about how you can cheat IRS. And I said, that's not what I learned biblically in school. I said, you don't tell the truth. Or the Bible's incorrect. I could accept that because you're not supposed to listen to the Old Testament, you're supposed to listen to the New Testament, and they have their conflicts. And I said, and I'm smart enough to learn that the Bible was written only 450 years ago by a bunch of scribes that were told by the different leaders of the government that if you don't get this right, I'll cut your head off. So, you know, and I said, of course, you guys always need, everybody I say that in the church says, wait a minute, Paul. You're a little off track, a little angry here. You know, this is God's word. And I said, okay. And I said, but I'm conflicted with these stories because being raised in 3 different religions, you're led to believe that each religion is the only way to heaven. And
What are the 3?
Protestant, Jewish, and Christian Zionists.
Oh, so what's the Jewish connection for you?
That was my mother's first, second husband,
okay.
Bob Merriam-Webster Dictionary Company.
Gotcha.
Gold and greed. You know, the Jewish way, right? And so you have these conflicts that you don't have. When you're that young, I didn't know this until I went back to school to become a daycare provider. I didn't realize how the child, the adolescent brain works, and the adult brain works, and those things. And still to this day, I have a very small adolescent brain of play. I went from child to work. To I have a hard time going out and just having fun. And it was the only reason I go to the fair is because I have to sell 52 vendors a location, or I'm making contacts and getting business cards so I can go to their locations later. And so that was the only reason. So that comes up in my life later on with the divorces because once I became married, it was about making money, buying suede couches, diamond rings, Corvettes, Picassos on the walls, things that were important because if clients were going to come to the house and be wined and dined, they need to see me as successful, and they're looking at a $80,000 Picasso on the wall. You know, and so those things, I said, well, this is the way society works. You know, and he who dies with the most gold wins the game. You know, so you go through. By that time, I kicked religion out the door. We haven't even got up. Actually, I kicked religion out the door before I met your mom. And I was building hot rods in the auto shop. And the old Swede that used to work on my hot rod, he'd listen to it, take a broom handle that he'd cut off, and he'd put the broom handle next to your engine block. And you can do this on your family car. You can listen to the whirling of the inside of the engine very distinctly. And if there's a knock in the engine, you can run that piece of wood all the way down that block and find out that this number 2 main needs to be replaced, and the other ones are okay. And so he taught me all those kind of things. And I was 17, almost 18, and he grabbed me by the nape of the neck and my shirt, and he big man, he picked me up against the wall and said, "Look, you little shit. At the rate that you're going, you're going to end up in San Quentin." I said, "Aren't you old enough to go in the military?" I said, "Not till next month." He says, "Well, then you better go join." He said, "I know you don't have any influence. Your folks went to Europe, left you just running wild in California." And that part of the story I hadn't told yet, but I'll back up since I remember that, is that when I left home after the incident, my mother was slapping me across the kitchen. I ran away from home, and I worked with a black man and did the janitorial and landscaping on my on the model homes that my folks sold. And so I still had that job because I worked. I don't even remember that guy's name now. The black man, nice guy. And he said, "Well, you can crash on my couch." I said, "Well, you can't tell my mom." He said, "Okay." So we go to work and then pick up some extra change. You know, I wasn't working full time and I wasn't going to school full time. I was just running my street route all over San Francisco Bay Area. And one day my mother knocked on the door and I answered at his house. Here's my mother standing in the door, and she said, "Son, your father and brothers and I are going to the Riviera and we'll be living in Europe for the next 2 to 5 years. And I just wanted to let you know, and I hope you have a good life." Turned around, walked over, got in the car, and drove off. And I said, "Well, thank God she's out of the country." And emotionally, that's part of me, the humor part of me says that. The other part of me is this: I was right. She does love my brothers more than me. You know, I wasn't first in her life. And of course, as the years go on, you sit back and you say, "Well, I did most of that to myself." And it wasn't her. It was her just trying to do everything but try to kill me for for discipline. Because when 2Fers don't work, and belts don't work, and metal rods don't work, and standing in the corner and being in your room doesn't work, your parents get to the point of just, what do we do now? And they hadn't been good examples. So it was, I wouldn't do what they asked. But, so they go off to Europe. And me and my buddies are burglarizing gas stations for oil and batteries and tires. Because we weren't making enough money we weren't paying rent. We were sleeping on somebody's couches. We were just ragamuffins, out of control. And my friend grabbed me, said, "You better go join the military and straighten your ass out." Which I did, and when I got my draft notice in the mail, he told me, you choose what military you want. And I chose the Navy, so when I went to the recruiter's office to enlist, the recruiter said, "I noticed that you have two aliases and one real name. Which name do you want to use?" And I looked at him and said, "What do you mean 3 aliases and a real name?" And he said, "Well, your last name's Foote. You're a junior. You didn't know that, young man?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "What's these other ones?" I said, "Well, these were the different stepfathers I had, those last names." I said, "Oh, your mother must have lied to the school system and put you in school under those names." And it wasn't years later I realized that she was hiding me from my real father. It's sort of similar to what happened to you. Different dads, different names, and you go, "Oh Lord, who am I?" Because it doesn't get you grounded. It doesn't make you don't have a family to ground to and say, "This is who I am. This is our roots." So I never had roots. In the military, it was a disciplinary problem. I had captain's mess every month I was in the military. But I was a trained swimmer for the first astronaut shot, so they needed me aboard ship, which gave me liberty to do anything I wanted to do. They couldn't kill me. And they couldn't lock me up in a brig because tin cans don't have brigs. So when you're restricted for 2 weeks aboard ship and the ship's at sea for 18 days, everybody's restricted, so I don't care. But what it did do is, since I couldn't go to Liberty when we did come to port, there's such a thing in the military called a slush fund, and you loan out $5 for $7 to be paid back next payday on that 5 for 7. And then if you couldn't pay it, you compounded the interest, and now they owed you, another $2 on the 5 plus the interest on the $2. And if they didn't pay me, there was only 2 of us. The chief loaned money to the officers and controlled the upper ranks, and I had $4,000 out here in float with all of the guys aboard ship. And I put the word out, if you hadn't paid me back your $7, you weren't going to be able to borrow money from everybody else either. So you were stuck on board. Well, my buddy was worked up in CIC, and he was a code guy, trained to break codes, military codes, stuff like that. So he had an elaborate code so I could keep track of everybody's name in my little book without your name being there. It was just a bunch of letters and just crazy things. And so one of the guys that owed me about $200 turned me in, and I went to captain's mess. The captain says, you're being accused of running a slush fund, from what this young man says. And I said, whatever he says, sir. I said, I'm not going to argue with him. And he said, well, I'm going to have to restrict you to the ship for 2 weeks and take 2/3 of your pay for the next 2 months. And I reached in my pocket and I said, do you want that in cash? Which turned into 8 weeks of restriction. And busted in rank. And he says, so now I'm back to being a seaman. But I was also in charge of the forward refueling station. When you're at sea running 24 knots in wartime, you shoot it's a bolo. It's a small rope where you've weaved it together to where it makes a knot. And it's all one piece bolo, and you swing it sort of like you would expect a cowboy to swing a lasso, and you throw it over to the next ship. And that's attached to a cable, and you pull the cable across at sea, you connect the 2 ships front and back with the cables. Then on that you slide in about a 5-inch heavy-duty rubber hose and lock it together, and you're pumping fuel from the aircraft carrier, or the fuel can ship to your ship. And I don't know if you're familiar with what a pelican hook is, but a pelican hook has a couple of great big links, has a steel arm that comes down here and hinge here. This arm comes up here and has a latch that comes up here and a pin that goes in it, and that big cable going to the other ship is locked in here. And of course, both ships are steering a little bit out like this, so there's taut, so that the hoses aren't in the water. And you're doing 24 knots, it's 34 miles an hour, right? You're pumping fuel as fast as you can to fill up those fuel rings. And we did that every day when Kennedy was assassinated. I think I was on war alert 24 hours a day. But anyhow, and I was in charge of the forward refueling station. And the Lieutenant J.G. knew one on board. We called him a 90-day wonder. And 90-day wonders in the military are guys that got their stripes or their bars to be an officer in ROTC at college. They'd never been to boot camp. They had no practicals. They didn't have any sea knowledge. Of course, us old salts, as they call us, This is our domain. You know? And he went to tell me to do something, and I said, oh, I'm not going to do that. He said, that won't work. And he ordered me to do it. He said, I'm an officer, so him and I got on each other's nerves. And he made a comment, the next time that happened, he said, I'm tired of this. He said, I'm going to make it my job to get you kicked out of the Navy and spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth Penitentiary. And I said, well, Lieutenant, take your best shot. I said, you're going to have to work real hard to make that happen. And turned around and walked away. I had a metal fid in my hand. It's a spike about that long, tapered all the way, big head on it. And that's for weaving steel lines together, is what it's for. Like a big monster toothpick, but heavy duty. And he hollered at me again, and I spun around and I threw that sucker, and it stuck in the bulkhead right behind him. I was just hot, hot. Another captain's mess. And the captain says, I understand what happened. He said, but you shouldn't have thrown that fit at that officer. And he said, between you and me, he said, I'll have him shipped to a different ship. I said, I still need you over here for swimming at Ford Refueling Station. Well, in the meantime, he kept sending new guys down to replace me, because he said, as soon as I can get you replaced, he says, you're out of here. He'll bring up charges. So he sent me down a new boot. God, he hadn't been out of boot camp 30, 40 days. And I didn't put the pin in the clasp up there. It was holding us together on purpose. And I was teaching the kids how to do it. And he had done it. He'd done all that. No, I think he put the pin, but I pulled the pin out. And when nobody was looking, you're out at sea doing this, and everybody was preoccupied with this stuff. And every time I could see everything, nobody could see me. I just tapped that little hinge. Pretty soon it just flipped loose and sprayed crude oil all the way down the side of the ship and broke the ships away, and the bad one broke off. And the captain's screaming. I said, Lieutenant sent the new boot down, sir. I'm sorry. I said, I'm trying to do my best. He said, Lieutenant, leave that Ford Refueling Station alone. So he got shipped off the ship. As soon as we hit port, he was gone, man. And I was a hero on board ships. Thank God you got rid of that son of a bitch, because everybody's covering your ass when you get an officer that nobody likes. We had 273 guys on board ship, So, and they all owed me money, so you have extra pull. But I finally got tired of that, and had about 4 or 5 months left to go in the service, and Kennedy being assassinated, and we just didn't know what to do with that information in America. We didn't know if we were going to go to nuclear war, military war footing because of that. So, H.L. Hunt. Never forget H.L. H.L. He was one of my drinking buddies. He was the captain's yeoman. I said, H.L., we're sitting in a bar in Yokosuka, Japan, and I said, I got to get off this boat. I said, we've been over here for almost 3 years now. And normally you went to Westpac and you'd spend 6 months and you'd come back, spend 18 months in the States, and you'd go back. And we were the first Des run to be home ported out of Yokosuka, Japan, to the point where we're speaking Japanese over the walkie-talkies. And so he says, I'll check to see what's available. And the astronaut had come down, so they no longer needed me. We were 13th alternate location in the world that he might land in, and didn't land in our area. And at that time, in the training for that, we showed all the classified information of UFOs and all the radar pictures and all the recordings and that the military had. And we're sitting there in class asking the lieutenant, why doesn't the government tell the public this information because we were all sworn to secrecy. And he said, because the world isn't ready for it. We fund movies with the idea that it'll soften up the mentality that there are aliens on the planet. He said, but as soon as all the churches find out that this isn't the center and Adam and Eve and all things religion all happen on this planet, and he said, public wouldn't be able to handle it. And he said, that's our reasoning behind it. So, which sort of fortified my Christian background of disbeliefs. I said, okay, well, that makes sense. In my mind, it made a lot of sense. So we went back to the ship, and about a week went by, and one of the yeomen come down and he says, here's your orders. I said, orders for what? He says, you're getting transferred to USS Piedmont, San Diego, California. I said, really? So I said, I said, I'm getting transferred. He said, yeah, captain doesn't read anything I put in front of him, he just signs the damn shit. He said they needed a cook. He said, you can cook, can't you? I said, well, I can cook. I said, but I've never cooked in the Navy. I said, I'm a bosun. I was trained to run this ship in case everybody else was dead. You know? He said, well, you're a cook now. And he says, you're going to fly out in 2 days to stateside. So we flew out of Japan to Hawaii and saw Hawaii twice. Once on restriction on the ship and looked at all the pretty islands. Never got to touch the ground. Next time we landed, fueled up the aircraft and flew to San Diego, so I got to see it out the windows. Still have never set foot in Hawaii on the ground. And so I get to San Diego, and we're I report to the chief cook, and after about 5 minutes or 30 seconds maybe, the chief says, "You're no damn cook." He said, "I'm sure you're a good cook at home." He said, "What are you really?" I said, "I'm a bosun mate, Chief." I said, "But I couldn't stay in Japan one more day, and the yeoman got me this immediate transfer." He said, "Well, we're just tied up here at port." He says, "I can teach you to boil 500 eggs, make 50 gallons of mush for the guys in the morning for chow." And he said, "You only got 4 months left in the military anyhow." He says, "Don't worry about it." And
My report is on.
and so we that's where the world sort of went upside down. "Hello, girl, you snuck in?"
Yeah.
Hi. I don't want to disrupt you.
That's all right.
Ooh.
I got it. I'm making this.
Yeah, so 4 of us are out, and I was always ended up being the ringleader of these groups, and I couldn't get past Kennedy's accent. I started just talking like him, and it really upset me. And my other 4 buddies were at the bar drinking. I said, "Why in the hell are we even in this military?" Next thing I know, we're AWOL. And we take off. And DC comes back. We'd made it from San Diego. We were out in the middle of Nevada. And the car broke down. And we're trying to figure out, here we're AWOL, no income. We're in civilian clothes. Still had our military ID, which thank God was a good thing. DC comes back. We're in Hawthorne, Nevada, he said, I got us a ride. He pulls up in this 4-door Cadillac. I said, he said, oh, don't worry about it. Guy left keys in it. He says, we're okay. Off we took in this stolen Cadillac. Guy's ID was in it. It was the owner of the casino there in town. We started driving across the country. We got picked up in Springfield, Missouri. And they picked us up on the street, 2 of us in the car. The other 2 guys had girls in the motel room that they picked up in town. And we decided we weren't going to tell them who we were. They're not very smart when you're that age. So they sent us to Kansas City to, God, it seemed like the 18th story. They had holding cells up there. And we're holding true to form. We ain't telling them. We threw all of our idea away. We figured we could beat the system. We're smart. Well, they sent us from there to Great Lakes. In Great Lakes, they give us the captain's mess because the other guys had never done anything wrong in the military. They sent them back to ship because they still had 18 months, 2 years left on the duty. I was down to 90 days, less than that, maybe 60 days. They went this whole thing, and of course they assigned you with an attorney. And he said, you go back for sentencing, and I'm the only one now in the room. And you have this big military panel, something like you would see in a movie. And he said, Mr. Foote, we've decided we're going to discharge you from the military. In fact, your discharge date was 30 days ago. He said, my 4 years had run out. And he said, but we're going to give you a dishonorable discharge, not a general discharge, with the option that if you stay out of trouble for the rest of your life, you can have that changed at any time in the future. He says, get your local sheriff, pastor, a few people testify, write a letter. He said, we'll convert this discharge, which I never did, by the way. I said, nah. So I put my civvies on, pack all my military stuff in my sea bag, walk up to the main gate, set it down, and the lieutenant says, you left your sea bag there, sailor? I said, no, that wasn't mine when I came here, and it's not mine now. I'm no longer in the Navy. I said, do whatever you want with that stuff. Left the base, hitchhiked into town. DC was with me. He got discharged. We rented an apartment, got a job at EJ Corvettes, and like a big Macy's department store. 3-story building, J.C. Penney's type thing. They had a chain of about 17 stores. And I got a job as assistant director of the hardware department or manager, and DC got a boys wear. And it was all October, about this time of year maybe, and Halloween stuff was coming out, and they would just come out with these rubberized tarantulas that looked sort of real, and I grabbed a handful of them and stuffed in my pocket when we went through the toy department, and the restaurant that your mom worked at was across the way where we always had lunch. And all the cups on her tables were upside down on a saucer. So I stuck the tarantulas in the cups, so because she had a habit of coming up and grabbing 2 cups and just flipping them to pour coffee. Of course, those spiders came by. Scared her to death. And but nobody could date her. She wouldn't date anybody from the store. And one of the guys just said, I bet you can't even date her. And I said, I bet I can. And I don't remember what the bet, how much the bet was, or if there was anything involved in it other than maybe a beer. And he said, well, how are you going to get her to date you? I said, well, we all have lunch over here. And some of us have dinner here. I said, God. I said, we throw all the parties at the store. I said, we'll get the 200 girls that work as cashiers, stop giving her tips. And after a week or so, your mom said, I had asked her out, and she said, no. And she said, I think you're involved in this somehow. I'm not getting any tips. And these are all the people you know. And they said, well, I could talk to them and maybe we could fix this. That was our first date. That's how it occurred. Then a couple of months went by. We were still dating off and on, and you'd been conceived. I didn't know that then. And I got a job, newspaper, looking for drivers to drive cars from the Chicago auction to Seattle. And they were paying $50. And that was a lot of money back then. And so I went and got this station wagon that they picked it up, and I had 3 days, I think it was 3 days, maybe it was 4 days, to drive to the coast. And I went by your mom's apartment to tell her I was going back to California. And she was sad and teary-eyed. And I said, hey, we're just dating, you know? And her girlfriend, she went back up in the house crying. And her girlfriend came out. She said, you can't go. I said, what do you mean I can't go? So she's in there crying. I said, well, I know. I said, but I got to deliver this car, and my family's out there. And I told her many times I didn't want to spend another winter in Chicago at 30 below zero and ice storms. I said, I don't know why she's that upset. She said, well, she's pregnant. And obviously that was you. So I go back in and I said, look, I said, I can't change what's already in play. I said, but, I said, if you want, I said, I'll go down to U-Haul and I'll get a bumper attachment and we'll hook your Chevy up to the back of the station wagon and pack up all your stuff. Well, I'm doing that, and DC and me will be back in a couple hours to hook up the car and drop the drive line, and we got to be on the road in about 5 hours to be able to make our deadline from Chicago to Seattle. She was ready. Unfortunately, we had the station wagon, so all of her clothes, and she had the car. And we got to, I had a great time going across the country. And we got to Seattle. We were down to maybe $10. And I don't know if have you ever dropped a drive line on a car? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, where the drive line buttons up to the transmission, and then the other end it buttons up to the differential that goes up and down. It's got what they call a U-joint. It's like a T. And on each end of it, you got 4 caps, and that's what's spinning. And it has a grease insert in them. And when we dropped the drive line, we just ran electrical tape around it to hold those caps on. Well, we lost one, dropped it in the dirt. Couldn't use it because it had sand in it, which meant we needed to buy a new one, which was $4. And I said, well, we won't have enough gas to get out of town. And walking through the lobby, looked at the at the desk, and I walked up and I said, we need to find a quick job somewhere in the area that the four of us can go to work to make enough gas money to go back to California. And he said, well, he said, they're running a radio ad right now. They need strawberry pickers, and if you get down to the dock at 5 o'clock in the morning, he said, they'll run you out to the island and pick strawberries, and they'll have lunch for you, and they'll pay your ticket to come back. You should be able to make enough money in one day. The three of you guys picking strawberries. So why not? Well, when you're picking strawberries and you have to pick them with no tassel, no green tassels, all these strawberries are going to jam. But they paid, and we took that job because they paid $35 a flat. But that was the highest paid of the other ones, because you could pick the other ones quicker, you got paid less. But the strawberry top, well, we made less than $35, all three of us in one day. And sore, oh, you're down on your hands and knees bent over all day long. I mean, your lower back is about ready to die on you. So we get back, pay for the motel, buy some food, fuel up, and take off from Seattle. And we get down to Portland. And we headed toward Portland because we heard from the strawberry pickers that in Portland they're picking apples. He says, any immigrant you see down there, they'll tell you where they're picking apples. You'll be able to find the apples easy. So we got down there, and I said, no, I said, man, I don't know, this is a lot of work. So I told my buddy, I said, I think I'm going to do, I said, I'm going to call my sister. Tell her I'm coming home from the Navy, and I said, maybe I can get her to wire us $10 for fuel. And it's 600 miles, 700 miles. I said, back then, fuel was cheap, so $10 would get us there. And the phone booth door was half open, and I'm trying to talk my sister into giving me the $10. And I got to the point of the conversation to my sister that she was really hesitant. I said, look, I said, tell her and tell Mom I'm coming home to get married. And at that time, your mom opened up the phone booth and heard that statement and was excited, ecstatic. And so I stayed with the lie, which goes back to the conversation here with your son and your family. How dangerous a white lie can be, or a fib, or an out-and-out lie can be, how drastically it can change your life for better or for worse. So now I'm stuck in the middle. There's no way out of this scenario at this point. And my mother, we had a wedding with, my mother had rock gardens with waterfalls into the swimming pool in our backyard, and a house like this, and all the church friends and all her girlfriends at the wedding, and a gown that was super expensive. They'd gone to San Francisco, gone to the finest places, and those things. And stepfather gave me a apartment complex to do the maintenance on and maintain out in Tiburon, so you're overlooking Tiburon's where Robin Williams died, that area. And so you have a news reference. You're looking out at San Francisco, Alcatraz, Angel Island, the lights. It's an incredible location of the world, actually. And your mom gets a job at IHOP, and I think it was IHOP. They had the 24 and 12 pitch roast. Yeah, IHOP pancake restaurant. Because she was a natural waitress, unbelievable waitress. And DC got a job selling groceries, or at a grocery store, because he had a family history from North Carolina His family owned a grocery store, so he grew up in that industry. So there, everything's going great, and she's getting further and further along, and so my folks take me down to I'm trying to think of the name of it. I think it's called Scandinavian Designs, but they make really high line furniture. I think they hired all the Amish in the world, but they came from Sweden and Norway, that kind of. But it was unbelievable craftsmanship. So we bought all this new furniture. Had this great apartment. We moved down off the running that condominium project in Tiburon, and we're closer to town, the hospital, and I'm trying to figure out. I said, and granted, in that scenario, in my mind, your mom's like your best friend, and there wasn't a situation where we'd fallen madly in love, or on my side. Her side, I think she did, but I don't know. And so, most terrible deed that I ever did is I flew her back to visit with her mom in Chicago. And I said, I only have enough money for a one-way ticket. I started selling Dodges for Sanderfeld Dodge, and give me more income. And she flew off. I said, when I make enough money, I'll buy you a return ticket. I said, that'll buy me enough time to come up with some way of telling her this has to end at some point. I can't keep on with this. So Gene, the stepfather I didn't like, military guy, I call him up and tell him I need to talk. And so he said, come to the office. I go to the office and I said, I don't know how to break this to you. And I said, or mom, or anybody. I said, but since you've been, say a prayer.
Amen.
Amen. And so at that moment in time, he said, get to the office, what did you want to ask me? I said, well, since you've been married and divorced, I said, how do you do a divorce? And he said, well, marriage is like a loaf of bread. He said, most divorces, the two parties involved get a hold of the loaf and they just tear it apart, and it's a million crumbs and nobody can eat the bread. He said, the smart way to do it is take a really nice, sharp, clean knife and cut it directly in half and let both people walk away as complete wholes without all the destruction. He said, why? And I said, because I'm going to tell a lie. That we have to get a divorce. He says, and she's in Chicago, right? And then I said, yeah. He said, you don't want to do that over the phone. He said, at least I wouldn't do it over the phone. He said, it might feel safer, but. So she flies back on her own dime. I tell her at the airport. And I had the opportunity at that moment in time and the guts at that moment in time to maybe buy a ticket and turn her back around and fly her back without any further ado. And I said, so I told her, I said, I'll take care of all the expenses. You can have anything you want. You can have everything we have. I said, and because of my broken childhood and stepfathers, I said, and stepbrothers, I said, I think it's important that I'm not involved in Troy's life at all. I said, it'll be very, in my mind, it would be very disruptive to his thought process and his learning progress, and whoever you choose in Chicago should be able to raise him and your way of life and the things you want in your family, the things that you've chosen. You know, without me interfering, saying you chose poorly, you did it wrong, or I would have done it this way. I said, you don't need that. I said, not in my opinion. So 6 months later, I got papers that got divorced. And 5 years later, I called Chicago. She was still listed. He said, I want to come out and see my son. I said, I'll respect the boundaries. I said, I'll just do it from a cab across the street. I was just curious. And I said, I don't want to interfere. And she said, let me think about it. Call me back tomorrow. I called back the next day. The phone was disconnected, which was my answer. And I said, I have to honor what I told her. I said, so I didn't look anymore. I really didn't look anymore. I just wondered. Just always wondered. And life went on. You know, not my proudest moments, but I thought it's important that you sort of understand some of this stuff so that you can put to rest whatever different things that are, I don't know what's going on in your mind, one way or the other, but obviously you'd wondered long enough to reach out to find me. And, you know, I said, so that says something that you're curious, you wanted to know. And I don't know any other cute stories to tell you. A couple of, I married Doreen, and Monica was born, and that was about 6 years. And Doreen started having affairs, and I searched the house and found 4 different love letters and 4 different handwritings, and recognized the handwritings, and invited the guys and their wives over we always got together and played cards, and I handed the letters to the girls. I said, you can sort this out, and they all recognized who their husband was, and the hand is shifting around. And but I didn't want to lose another kid. And so she moved out, got her own place, and I was purposely nice. And Monica was going to daycare. I knew that she dropped her off at 7:30 in the morning, so I was there at 7:45 and picked her up and told the girl at the daycare that I had the day off. And I drove her nonstop 250 miles to San Francisco. Pulled in my mother's driveway and handed her Monica. And I said, "Watch her." I said, "There's a divorce on the horizon." I said, "Don't tell anybody you have her." And backed out, made it back. And I was back in Carson City by the time she got off work at 5. And she called me up and she said, "I went to pick up Monica," and they said, "You picked her up? What time you want me to come get her?" And I said, "When you decide to get rid of all your boyfriends and move back in." She said, "You can't do that." I said, "Well, the next choice is I'll disappear into the world and you'll never know." I said, "I am not going to lose another child." I said, "This is right." It took me 30 days to calm down. I was hot. I was real hot, real angry. And I figured I'd done such a wrong to you and to Eileen that I'd emphasized, I think, in my head that I have to change my ways. It's got to be something I'm doing. So I'm looking at myself, trying to self-analyze, which is a very difficult thing to do, is to figure out why you do the things that you do. And after 30 days, I brought Monica back to her, and I said, "This is wrong." I said, "You can have the house and the car and the boyfriend, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I was a young carpenter. So I had a job, was doing piecework. So a month or so went by after that, maybe longer, and Jimmy, half Hispanic kid, drove snowplow, Incline Village. Come by there, still had the house, still living in the house. He said, knocked on the door, I said, Jimmy, what are you doing down off the mountain? I had known him, Tahoe's, snowplows, because we were building condos up there in Incline Village. And he said, I got a problem. I said, what's the problem? He says, you've been married and divorced. I said, yeah. I said, what's that got to do with your problem? He said, well, I got this lady friend that I'm dating, and she won't leave her husband. I said, maybe you could talk to her for me. And he said, I don't know what I could do. I said, but if you want me to talk to her, I said, you set it up and I'll talk to her. He said, well, we're all going to the Lake Tahoe next weekend, and we're going to have a picnic up there. Why don't I just invite you up there, and then I'll take off on the ski boat, and you can have a conversation with her. I said, okay. So I'm sitting there, and I said, they all left. And I said, yeah, they left because they want me to talk to you. And she looked at me and said, talk to me about what? And they said, well, he wants me to find out why you won't leave your husband for him. Of course, she's surprised I even knows at this point in time. And she said, why do you ask me? She says, because I've been married and divorced a couple of times. I said, you're in a predicament, I said, that I got into where I was lying to the woman of my life and got stuck in, it was kind of a predicament and didn't know how to get out of it. I said, why won't you tell Jimmy? He says, because if I do, he'll think that I'm leaving my husband, so I'll marry him. And I don't love him. I'm just having an affair with him. I said, poor girl. I said, I sort of been there, done that. I said, not quite that way, but I said, you got to tell him. I said, or you'll end up destroying his life and your life and your husband's life and your child's life. And I said, Diane was 3 years old. I said, nothing came out of all mine. Nothing came out of it good. Not one thing good other than 2 great children were born. I said, other than that, I said, and I don't know about the first because he was 18 inches long and 8 pounds. I said, I don't know how that one's progressing. I said, but I said, I found out that you can't lie. You can't, there's no way out of this thing. There's just, once you tell that what you assume to be a white lie, there's no way that you can make it right. I said, so they came back and I got in my truck and went down the mountain, and I'm sitting at the casino. My favorite game in the casino was blackjack. I could count cards and never lost. Sit there and run $20 up to 10 grand and say, hey, thanks for the pay raise. I'm out of here. And I was there frequently enough that everybody knew me by name. Everybody in the casino, everybody. Pit bosses all the way down to the janitors. When you're local, everybody knows. Sort of like you out in sales, everybody knows who you are. And I'm sitting down there watching the music, and we had a cabaret, a dance floor in the casino. I was sitting there drinking a scotch and water, and Roseanne walks in, and I got to talk to you. 8 o'clock at night, you got to talk to me. I said, where's the baby? Out in the car sleeping. You got to come with us. Oh, God, Crow. I said, okay. So I left the tip and followed her out of the car, and I said, and we took off. I said, okay. So this is the situation with Jimmy, da 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 da. So we drove from 8 o'clock until the sun came up the next morning, all through the state of Nevada. One great big circle. Just drove all night long. And I said, the end result was, she said, since I met you, she said, I can't stop thinking about you. I want to be with you. And I said, whoa, 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 Carl. I said, you're already having an affair on one husband, and now you want to have an affair on your boyfriend. And I said, and you chose me? I said, I'm getting to the point where I don't even want to see women anymore. I said, I can't believe anything that's going on. I said, this is insane. Yeah. Right after that, I picked up a 2x4 on the job and blew out my back, and they had to do back surgery. And she came over. She said, "You can come crash on my couch, so, and be my babysitter." And so that's sort of how that started. And then her and I got married, and but because of you and Monica, I made her take a count of her birth control pills every day to make sure that she was not going to get pregnant. And it was another scenario where I'm not sure I love this girl, but I was lonely. I didn't, and the thing that I realized at that time that I was searching for was a family, one family, old Western family. 20,000 acres, and the entire family born and raised, and Grandpa died, and everybody was there on the family forever and would die to protect the family's cattle ranch, the old Western story. And she said, and I was not a local per se, didn't grow up in that area. And she said, one of the nights that she came home from work and I'm living on pain pills and scotch, with fond memories of her daughter pulling out the drawers and climbing up on the counter and walking down and getting the peanut butter and the jelly and all over the top of the counter, making me a sandwich to bring to the couch. Funny little memories like that I remember. And she said, we need to get married. So I said, okay. He says, so we got married by the Justice of the Peace on Christmas Eve, if I remember right. And at that point in time, I met her father, and here I'm marrying a girl that's heir to a 4,000 acre cattle ranch that I later found out was 150,000 acres at one point in time. So the salesman, entrepreneur, business mind kicks into gear. And I said, well, I need to go to work for the ranch. I need to learn how the ranch operates if you're going to inherit this at some point in time. I said, it's the only thing that makes sense. I said, from what little bit, I don't like my dad. I haven't talked to him in 4 years since my mother died. So I started creating situations where we had to talk to him, and found out that he was born, we're one day apart. He was born the 14th of April, I'm born the 15th, so we met, our ideas meshed unbelievably well. It was almost like a carbon copy, but he had polio in 52. And he asked, we're out there having dinner. She's in the kitchen, old kitchen, built in 1908, doing the dishes. I'm sitting there having coffee, and he said, comes back from the table with a little box, sets it down in front of me. He says, just curious. He says, you kids want to inherit land or money? And I said, well, land. I said, I can't work long enough, Harry, in my lifetime to acquire 4,000 acres and 500 head of cattle. He said, okay, but wait a minute. She coming out of that kitchen. What do you mean land? I said, dear, it's the only thing that makes sense. I said, this ranch has taken care of the family since, your dad's saying, since 1864. Abe Lincoln signed the deeds. I said, we can't, you working down there as a secretary at 120 words a minute and me selling cars and building houses, so we can't make enough money to even think about buying something like this. I said, besides, this is your family. And he said, well, you better move out here. There's an old 2-story house. So we moved upstairs, and big tall ceiling like this. There's a room up here, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And there was a room below this, above this table too. It's just like this. And I said, I'm going to go up with a snowmobile and I'm going to cut Christmas trees. Christmas is coming. Open a Christmas tree lot in town, and I'll custom cut. People want a 40-foot Christmas tree, I'll go get it. So I get this Christmas tree lot, pick out this incredible tree that I'm going to cut, take her up in the snowmobile the next day. I said, what do you think about the top of this tree? She had the prettiest Christmas tree I ever did see. I said, okay. I said, you tell me when I'm up high enough, and I'll cut it. So I climb up the center of this tree. That tree must have been 100 feet tall. She said, that's about right. So I'm up there with a handsaw, tied a rope around it so it wouldn't break when it falls. Well, I said, you sure? 'Cause that tree's this big around. I couldn't see the top. I'm in the inside of this tree. And I follow that tree. Had enough rope to keep it from hitting the ground and lower it down flat. And I'm like, I said, sweetheart, this tree's 30 foot long. She said, they've only got 12-foot ceilings. She said, well, take the top 20 feet. And we'll cut it to the size we'll get to that house first. So I'd taken some visqueen up there. They rolled the tree up on the visqueen, tied a rope around the tree, and hooked up to the snowmobiles. And I did it behind mine first, and this snow would be kicking on the visqueen, making it heavy. And well, this didn't work, so I had to hook both of them up so that there's snow was kicking out to the side, and we get the tree down. Well, I measure. I said, sweetheart, we only get 12 foot. She said, she said, but she said, I want you to cut it off at 12 foot. And I said, cut it. She said, not from the top down, from the bottom up. And she said, I want you to take the other part of it and put it upstairs in the kids' room so it's a continuation of the same damn tree. So I measured, had it perfectly aligned, nailed it down to the old hardwood floors. You can hang bicycles on those bottom limbs. I'm not kidding. I mean, it took up that entire room. It was just unbelievable. And I'd gone to, here, sore start here. And yeah, I had to go to town the next day, and I had to go out to this old timers place, junkyard, out next to the cat houses in Carson City. And I get out there, this old man. I don't even remember why I went out there now, but in the process of walking through the yard, over in the corner, I says, is that a stagecoach? And he said, well, it was made to look like a stagecoach. It was actually a float. Doesn't have any wheels. He said, why? I said, I want that. He said, you dig it out and I'll let you have it for $50. He said, but if you want me to dig it out, it's going to be $500. Because everything was, so I got it out, got it on a flatbed truck. And I didn't want anybody to see it at the ranch. So
In what state is this, by the way?
Nevada, Carson City, Nevada. And her family, I mean, you got to remember, this is old mining. Her dad had deed signed where you traded your 640 acres, your section of land, for a horse and a cow and a wagon because you gave up mining. So in the bottom of it, he had signed, and the family signed, if you ever bring back the horse or wagon, you can have your land back. We don't need more land, you know, because it was just the ranch just kept getting bigger and bigger. You didn't need more land, and you needed 30 acres of land to raise one cow. It was, you know, the sagebrush and desert terrain. So I get that thing, that cover wagon loaded, and I take it in the barn. I painted it bright candy apple red with black striping around where they had they used angle iron for all the seams in the barn. And my wife goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "You can't tell anybody." I said, "I'm going to sneak this out Christmas Eve." I said, "Leave it in the front yard, and this will be the kids' playhouse. So when they wake up Christmas morning, they'll have a playhouse." I said, "Well, that night it snowed." And I get woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning. This little one just tugging on, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." He said, what? He says, "You gotta get up." He says, "Santa forgot his sleigh." he said, or the rainbow, or the deer couldn't pull it, and they had to go get some more deer. Which continues another lie. On forever and ever and ever. And but those are some of the fun things. That ended up in a $2 million divorce. That during that period of time, I started cutting the infected trees in the top of the forest up here when they have what they get, a pine beetle, and they goes in and kills the tree, and they jump to the next tree and so on and so forth. And you could see them if you were here. You could see where the beetle had gone, sort of a straight line across that ridge, or halfway up the ridge. And I told the old man, I said, I got to get those trees down up there to save the rest of the forest. He said, "Well, as long as it doesn't interfere with you taking care of the ranch, keep the fences up and the cattle in." I said, "Okay." So I went and got a chainsaw and started falling trees. Well, now I have 1,000 trees on the ground. And I said, "Well," I said, "I can't leave them here to rot." I said, "I'll chunk them up into 2-foot pieces and run an ad in town and sell firewood." Well, that first year was 500 cords of firewood at $100 a cord. And I told the old man, I said, "It's not right that I sell your trees and keep the money." I said, "How about I pay you stumpage? So it's legal, and I said, I'll pay you $12 a cord for the tree, and the rest could be Roseanne's and mine." Well, the next year it was 1,500 cords of firewood. Third year it was 3,000. Fourth year it was 4,000. And I came up with the idea that since you get propane delivered once a month and they keep your tank full, I said, "You order firewood, I'm going to deliver your cord of wood to you in April rather than handle it twice from the forest to the ranch, from the ranch to your house. I just drop it off, and you call me up and say, 'Hey, Paul, this is Troy.' I said, 'Did you drop off some firewood in my front yard this week?' I said, 'I sure did.' He said, 'I didn't order any.' I said, 'You're going to order some in November, aren't you?' And he said, 'Well, yeah.' And I said, 'Then you pay me in November. I just don't want to handle it twice.' So I just cut and ship, just instantaneously, and trust all my customers. So I grew to be the largest firewood. So the timber industry grew out of that because now I didn't have enough wood. I was out every year by the 15th of November, out of wood. 4,000 cords, I was out of wood. So now I'm going up to Oregon finding firewood in your backyard, buy the whole thing, send 3 semis up. Then I'd go down to the mill, buy the whole thing, all the coals that they had. And just couldn't seem to get much bigger. And that led me to, in the meantime, I had built, because of a radio ad, T-Car Speedway was running an ad. Roseanne hadn't missed any race since the track had been built. So she was a big race car fan. And I'm sitting in a restaurant waiting to meet a salesman. And behind me in the booth, Lad King and Bob Myers. Bob Myers owned the track. Lad King was his president of the racetrack. And I hear them talking about real estate, so my ears perk up. They grew up at a real estate table. Turned my head slightly so I could hear real good. And he says, well, he said, the last two offers fell through because we can't provide building permits for the racetrack. And us locals that lived there knew he just added it without a permit. I mean, we knew that because we were also the labor that helped do some of that. We didn't care. It pays cash. We don't care. We'll build it. And so I was kidding. I turned around this way, tapped his shoulder, and he turned around. That you, Paul? And I said, yeah. He says, what do you want? I said, you need somebody like me to buy that racetrack. He said, Paul, you don't have $1 million. I said, well, you're only asking $885,000. I said, I don't need $1 million. He said, well, you don't have 800,000 either. And I said, no. I said, but I got a willingness to pay you 12% interest and $12,000 a month, and what do you got to lose? The worst thing that could happen is you have a month's vacation for $12,000 in your pocket. Didn't have to run a racetrack. So how much money do you have? I said, well, according to my wife, I think we got $5,015 in savings account. He reached around and grabbed my wrist. He said, you better have $5,000 in that bank account. So we went down to the title company, and I wrote him a check for $5,000. And drew up all the paperwork. This is a high-banked asphalt oval NASCAR track with 4,000 bleachers, 3 stories, 100 yards of vendors or grills and bars on the back of, because the racetrack's down here and you seats here, and then the top walkway was built wide enough you could run an ambulance down there in case you had to get fans out. But it was also for everybody to stand in line to buy more food. So he says, here's your keys. It's good luck. He says, the race is starting 10 days. I said, I know, I'm a driver. He said, well, I expect that $12,000 check here in 30 days. He said, you'll have a couple of races underneath your belt. You'll have enough money. I said, okay. So I'd come into town other than for the business meeting that never happened because of that event, also to pick up eggs, bacon, milk for the ranch. And I pull into the ranch, and it's a mile from the cattle guard into the barnyard. And I'm coming down that dusty road, and I roll in the barnyard, and Roseanne's on that front porch, and that baby in her arms, and that foot is just stomping like this on the deck. I says, what? She said, you weren't supposed to buy a racetrack, you were supposed to buy groceries, and I suppose you forgot the groceries. I said, no, I got the groceries. She said, how'd you get the racetrack? I said, how'd you find out that I had the racetrack? We live 15 miles away from town. She said, you forgot, I went to high school here, and every girl working in that office I went to school with, and they're on the phone. You're buying the damn racetrack. I said, well, you've never missed a race since you've been on the racetrack. I said, when it was built. I said, you love the races. I said, you even got a fan club for me. I was number 001. Across the top of it said Bigfoot at large. She said, you know that we got races in 10 days? I said, yes, I know we got 10 races in 10. And you spent all of our money. I said, yes, I spent all of our money. In fact, we might even be overdrunk. She said, and what are we supposed to eat for 10 days? I said, well, it comes with 5,000 hot dogs, 5,000 hamburgers, a complete stock bar, 4,000 cans of beer. I said, I think we can make it for 10 days. Kids to this day won't eat hot dogs. I don't care how you cook them. Every imaginable way you can imagine. So we go back out the track in the morning. The view of our new holdings. Didn't understand years until years later why it all happened, but it was because everybody had the image of the old man standing in the shadows above us to bail the kids out, or whatever we crazy kids might do, because he was the biggest rancher in the area, sort of like the Ponderosa. In fact, they had offered to buy the rancher one time, and so the. She said, how you gonna sign? I said, I don't know. A little white van pulls in. Guy walks up, little nameplate, hold the clipboard. He said, you the new owner? I said, yeah. He says, well, I'm here to take your meat order. I mean, how much hamburger and hot dogs you need an opening day? I said, I don't know. I haven't been here long enough to look at the books. I said, most probably the same amount that Bob had last year. I said, he built the track. He said, okay. I said, I don't want that cheap hamburger. See there, and I don't want the cheap hot dogs. I want the best product. I want the product you give the casinos. And he looked, he said, that's going to cost you twice the money. I said, good. I want people eating dinner here. I don't want them not eating dinner. I said, I got 4,000 mouths. I said, they'll catch on after they taste that first hot dog, that first hamburger. I said, okay. Turned around the clipboard and said, sign here. And I signed it. He said, we'll be back. And he walked off. And I looked at her, Roseanne, and she looked at me, and he didn't ask for any money. So she's right there. Well, it says right here, 30, 60, 90, or cash. She said, I guess that's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or cash. Makes sense to me. I said, so we have up to 90 days before we have to pay this bill? She said, looks that way. I said, okay. Another white van came in. By the end of the day, 15 vans had showed up, and I'd signed my name away to about $150,000 worth of product. And in Nevada, the racetrack came with its own liquor license, so we sold hard liquor, booze. We could run prostitution on the third floor, gambling. I mean, Nevada's just crazy. So I parlayed that into, I needed walking around money, so the racetrack was surrounded by 4x8 sheets of plywood that they painted advertising signs on, and so I went to all those advertisers and said, you got to pay $300 this year. Well, he only charged it $100. I said, I don't care if that sign's white or not. I said, but if you want your name on that sign, it's going to be, you can come repaint it or leave it there, but it's $300 for the season. Okay, some people, they begrudgingly paid it. They're the only game in town. And because I figured I was a good enough salesman, I could sell all the ones that didn't want to pay. None of them wanted to back out of that deal, because they also were the sponsors of the race cars that I had learned. So they were in deep, And so opening night we did 26,000, and that grew to a friend of mine, Tom Gonzalez, knocked on my door 2 out in the morning with me. I said, Tom, what in the world? Wait a minute. He said, Paul. He says, you got to help me. I said, help you do what? He says, I'm the only truck driving school in the state of Nevada. I got a license to be the only one in the entire state, but I don't have any trucks. I said, okay, Tom. Last week, you were a Safeway truck driver driving for Safeway. I said, now you got the only license for the only truck driving school. Well, I know the guy that knew the guy. That's Nevada. He says, so he gave me a license to be the only school. And he says, I was thinking of you when I was doing it. He says, because you got the racetrack and obviously enough wealth to buy the racetrack. He says, you might be able to get a couple of tractors. I said, oh, God, Tom. I said, I've known you a long time. He was a carpet salesman. I mean, he was one of the, but he was a kinky guy. You give him $20 to figure out how to get that $20 to you across this table. He'd try to figure out how he'd get part of it before it got there. Mm-hmm. He just had to do it. He just had to figure out how to, I don't know. But anyhow, so I went up to the truck dealerships in Reno, and here they had all new trucks, and they had a bunch of old used ones over there. And I said, they asked, what can we do for you? And I said, well, we've got a truck driving school we're opening up at the racetrack in Carson City. I said, I need 2, maybe 3 old tractors that are smoking, rods are knocking, about ready to fall apart, go to the wrecking yard. He looked at me and said, we're not going to haul anything. We're just going to go around that racetrack in circles and teach those kids how to drive. I said, I want sleepers, so we can take out the sleeping part and put a bench in there so we can take 4 or 5 students at one time around that track. And then they can keep shifting over to learn how to shift. And he said, well, hell, those 2 will just give you since you're in school, and just, those 2 are $1,500 each. I said, deliver them. So now we had trucks. I said, oh, what about that burned out old flatbeds over there from that fire? What do you want those for? I said, well, we can shoot straight through to the brakes. So we don't need any deck on it, but they need to be lean over, be able to see what we're talking about, how to adjust the brakes and work on the brakes. And I said, how the air systems all work. And I said, this is perfect. He said, oh, we'll give those to you. So now we had truck driving school. So I go down to the county. I said, we opened up a truck driving school. Oh, thank God somebody's come to town. We'll pay you $1,385 for everybody that you put through your school. Graduates. Really? So now we had a state and county deal. And next day, the minimum security prison called and says, I understand you got us. And we backed up. The property's backed up. The racetrack and minimum security backed up. Says, can you bring a semi inside our yards? And I said, yeah, why? He says, well, some of these cons are going to be getting out and getting paroled. And he said, an idea that you got the truck driving school. It says, you can come over here and teach them to drive, and the state will pay you, the penal system will pay you whatever your going rate is to teach them to drive. So they got a job when they get out. I said, okay. Now we're up to $86,000 a month. With this stupid, crazy idea. And make a long story short, I did things like AC/DC, Van Halen, Blue Oyster Cult, 22,000 screaming kids, and now I'm spending 24 hours a day at the racetrack. He'd call me at 11 o'clock at night and say, hey, Paul, I'm building a new car. Can I come out and test drive it in the morning? I said, what the hell's wrong with tonight? And I'd leave my naked wife in bed and go hop on a race car. And I asked her years later what happened after she stopped hunting for me with a gun. But she said, I could compete against other women, but I couldn't compete against that racetrack. You fell in love with that racetrack. So it gave you power, money, prestige. You had the microphone. All the politicians in town were scared to death that you were going to go into politics and ruin their deal. And I'm going around with silk sleeves that look like they came out of Hollywood, $20 gold piece hanging from my neck, and new Corvettes and new Eldorado convertibles. My shit did not stick. And if you had a choice corner lot that I needed in town and you wouldn't sell it to me, I'd buy your mortgage and foreclose on it, just so I could own the property if you ever misstepped. And people would finally got to the point, and I didn't realize why all my friends stopped talking to me, but they were walking see me coming, they'd walk the other side of the street, because I turned really, really pretty evil. And Didn't know that for about 10 years. I went back to town. Somebody said, he says, talk to me. He says, why would you guys wouldn't talk to me 10 years ago? We were scared to death of you. You just took what you wanted. There's no remorse. You didn't care. You changed. You bought that race tape. You changed into something else. Well, that slap across the kitchen of being a hypocrite all came to surface because this was exactly what I was taught by my mother and stepfathers. They needed that land for a subdivision. That's how they got it. And I never realized that until 20 years or so after that incident. I didn't realize why was I doing this, why I had become into this person. And I justified, well, in Nevada, casinos break legs and put people in 55-gallon drums, and they don't pay and drop them off like meat. I said, hell, that's just business up here. I'm not doing nothing wrong. In fact, I'm not even killing anybody. I may take their livelihood away. They starved to death, but I didn't shoot them. So she filed for divorce. And the evilness doesn't stop at that point. And I said, I'd go down to the law library because I had done charity work for Jerry Lewis telethon. And I read a piece in the article where his wife had filed divorce and Jerry Lewis filed for bankruptcy to lock the money up somehow. So I went down to the law library, started reading, found out that if you file chapter bankruptcy of any kind, you get a 145-day to put in your plan from the date that you filed. And your creditors have 45 days to approve or disapprove of that plan and come in with their plan of how to solve the predicament. And so I called up my attorney and I said, I need an appointment. And I said, I need it right now. And he says, as soon as you get here. So I get there and walk in and I said, what do you know about bankruptcy law? And he looked at me, he says, are you in financial trouble? I said, no, I just need, do you know anything about it? He said, yeah, we studied some of that in law school. He said, I don't specialize in bankruptcy. In the federal courts, it's quite involved, but I know guys that's all they do. He said, what's your question? I said, is it true that if I file bankruptcy, my creditors, I got 145 days before I submit a plan on that bankruptcy, and then my creditors have 45 days to answer that complaint. And he said, yeah. I said, now, if I do that and convert the 13 to a chapter 11, does that start the clock off again? He said, yeah. I said, now, if I convert the 11 to a 7, does that kick the clock off one more time? And he said, yeah. And I said, if I convert the 7 back to the 13 where I started, does that kick the clock off? And he said, oh, you evil little son of a bitch, what are you up to? He said, I know you. You're about making money. I said, well, this time I'm about saving money. I've decided that she isn't the right person to control all of this, and she doesn't care. She doesn't care about the ranch, her dad, or the future. I said, I want all that time to pay off all the creditors 100%. Liquidate everything. So at the end, when she gets her divorce, I can go over and hand her the key and 20 business license with no money and no assets. He said, what in the hell did she do to you? He said, he said, I don't want you to be my enemy. He said, but that'll work. So that's what I did. And she came to the signing of her divorce papers with her boyfriend, grinning from ear to ear, because I said she could have everything she wanted in divorce papers. House, the Picassos, the art, the racetrack in her mind, the timber operation, the firewood operation, all this stuff. She could have it all. The only thing I kept out of the entire thing was my 1-ton truck, my log splitter, my chainsaw, and my tools. my clothes. I said, that's all I want. So she signed everything gleefully. Was you real happy? Then I signed, looked at the two attorneys were standing there. I said, now, are we legally divorced? They said, yep, you're legally separated and divorced. It's a done deal. And I turned around and I said, Roseanne, I want you to remember, I built everything that you're getting out of my mind. I said, today you and Dusty got a head start. You got 2 corporations and 20 businesses. And no money in the bank and no assets. I said, so you got a head start. And walking out, and they said that she looked for me, and they, from people in town later told me, she says, for 2 years, she had people out, she was going to kill you. She was absolutely going to kill you because she couldn't create it all. Nobody would do business with her because they'd all done business with me, and my word was gold and bond and, you know, other than the fear factor, but whatever I said, it happened. And so it was 10 years. And like you, I get a phone call. It's your brother, Tracy. And he said, Dad, I want you to come get me. I said, whoa. I hadn't heard his voice in, God, 10 years, over 10 years. And I said, why? He said, well, I'm in jail in Bakersfield and I need $900 to get out of jail. And he said, you're the only one I could think of. I said, so I drove, it was Father's Day. So I drove from Northern California to Bakersfield, picked him up, and he was under an alias. She changed his name. This seems to run with the family. My mother did it. Your mother did it. My, geez. So I pick him up and I said, I'm doing one thing. I said, this isn't your legal name. I said, you change your name to Foote. It's supposed to be. I said, from here, right here from the courthouse, we're going to the DMV. I said, so he did. And he had his birth certificate and paperwork, and he got his driver's license back in his own name. And she had done it to hide him. And at that time I had had opened up the daycare and the foster home and just won Educator of the Year award. And I said, we have a guest bedroom. You can move in there. I said, but since I'm licensed by the state and I'm a mandated reporter, I said, you can't do, you're underage. I said, you can't come to the facility drunk or drink or smoke. I said, or do drugs. I said, I don't know what you've been doing all your life. I said, of course he made the comment, well, Mom would let me. And I said, I'm not Mom. And I said, you want to test this? You'll find out as soon as they arrest your ass and put you in jail. I said, I've done enough wrongs in my life to know that that is not the path to go down, and it has destroyed all of my family. And I said, the only good thing I've got going for me is the 4 foster boys and these 12 kids. And I said, I'm going to raise them right, and they're going to learn it the right way. I said, I went to college to learn how to do it the right way, not from the street. So he did, and got a job setting chokers, and started slipping back into his old ways. All of a sudden, a limo would pull up out front. And we're kind of going on a date. He said, you don't think I'm going to pick your ass up? I'm married to a $17 million ranch. He had this wall, trophy wall of all these cute blondes. Oh, you can't do that, son. He said, well, I just turned 18. I can't do. I said, well, you can't live here. You can't be that example to these 14, 15, 16-year-old boys. I said, I'm not going to allow it. I said, I love you. I said, but what you're doing is wrong. And I said, I'm not going to. I said, I've done so many wrongs in my life. I said, they kept going on because I was never held to account. Nobody ever stopped me and said, you can't. Other than that one old Swede that told me I better join the Navy. Other than that guy, nobody ever said no. And they said, you don't know my history. He's like, you don't know my history. I said, who's going to stop? And he packed up his four-wheeler, took off that night, and went up to a kid's house up in Willits, California. He ran rodeos, and because of his ranch background, he still played around with the rodeo. And moved in with that family. And then didn't say goodbye, nothing. Then disappeared. And I tracked him down and found out that he was doing what the kids would call minor drugs, you know, pot, that kind of stuff, drinking, stuff like that. And about that time, your sister called. Her mom died, bronchitis. And she said, I need to get out of this life. She was into drugs. Had 4 kids by 4 guys. So I said, okay. I was running that's actually a little bit before Tracy. I was caretaking a 900-acre ranch for attorneys in Northern California. Keep the pot growers off, actually. And she needed a place to live, and the ranch next door had been bugging me about being the caretaker over there, and I could have the house over there. It was a 3-bedroom ranch house, overlooked the lake. It was a beautiful little place. So I called him up and I said, hey, I'll take over the property. Move my daughter in there with her boyfriend. He got a job at the local body shop. Found out that they were growing pot on the property, because that was part of my job, was to ride the property and make sure there's no pot plants. I didn't know that pot plants grow 16, 20 feet in the air, get to be this big around, but they do. And so I tell drug enforcement, and they said, no, don't mess with them. We'll fly over, take aerial pictures. He said, the hot ground will show the circles where the crops are, because that's where they water. And that'll show up in infrared. And that'll follow all the lines right down to the creek where they're getting the water. And he said, we'll arrive the same day they arrive to harvest their buds, and we'll get them all, and you get all the irrigation stuff you want afterward. She said, but don't you mess with it ahead of time, because they'll burn your place to the ground. He said, these are cartel people. And she was involved in growing that pot. And I told her, I said, the feds are going to come arrest you and your boyfriend. They said, you need to leave. But I'm your daughter. And I said, well, you're my daughter that I told you couldn't grow pot or do any harm to the land. I said that I'm as responsible for this entire 1,000 acres and this house and building. And I said, same thing I sort of told Tracy later. I said, I'm not going to have you destroy this new family I'm building. I said, you can call me a straight arrow. You can call me whatever you want to call me. I said, but you're going to have to leave. Next day they were U-Haul, packed up, and didn't hear from her until must have been 15 years. And she said, I'm in trouble. I said, what are you in trouble with? She said, the DA's investigated me for selling. And I said, oh, God. There's a restroom down there?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'll be there in the morning to hear this story.
I'm going to close this file out.